when Jose Arguelles suggested that this was going to happen, and people got together on the top of Pikes Peak and at other acupuncture points, as he calls them, to receive the energy. And now sacred travel is big business. Try the equinox on March 21st in Chichen. How many have been there on that day? At Floridians, you get a little closer to it. It's a phenomenon. Lorraine and I have attended this 12 times. We are now more interested in the people than we are. We started to go there because we wondered, well, does the shadow of the serpent, which comes down the balustrade, even with a stone-headed serpent with open fauces at the base, was that deliberately designed by the Maya to get to mark the equinox, or is it some modern fabrication of a touristic individual? We don't know the truth of it, but we do know that there are many believers. At the last event we attended about, was it 3 or 4 years ago, I think some 100,000 people, according to the Merida paper, were there to witness this and to lay hands on the pyramid, because that's the moment of the energy of Quetzalcoatl. Or is it Kukulkan? It's interesting, the Mexicans and the Mayas argued about this. So it's Quetzalcoatl. No, it's Kukulkan. Maybe they're one and the same. Next. Yeah, there you see, I wanted to show this. There's an image of a naked baby being held up. When I do a whole lecture on this. I had a lot of fun with this topic, and I remember when I gave this lecture once, and I said, and there you see the naked babe, and a man came to the audience afterwards. I didn't see any naked woman in that song. A naked baby. Yeah, so there's a poster in Ann Arbor, a big billboard in Ann Arbor, and to show another meaning for that. So, well, what sort of people are these? I don't mean the Mexican guys looking at the margarita, but these Y12ers. I think they're well-intentioned people. I think they want to see the world change. I think they are racked with fear from all of the terrible prognostications that have come upon us, even including the underwear bomber a week ago. We are now getting bodily scanned. Tune into CNN, Fox, any channel, and you will see one item after another designed to strike fear into us. So yes, we want control. We want to have control of our own future and our own cosmology. These people tend to be activists who want to participate in their own cosmology. But what's interesting to me is that they're anti-technology and anti-science. Listen to these statements about technology and science by John Major Jenkins. Western civilization rules the globe through domination and dominating forms of coercion and control. Here's a statement from Lawrence Joseph. The forces of scientific materialism have zealously guarded the portals to their domain. Here's another statement from one of these Y12 gurus. There's a growing demand for more complete disclosure of solar activity, vital to our health. In other words, you scientists are keeping this information secret. So there's a very interesting kind of war going on here by these activists who distrust not just institutions, but especially science. Yet, they make use of the scientific language, as I pointed out earlier, in their predictions. So this I find very, very paradoxical. They are fatalistic people, so that's why I have Shift Happens, which is actually the standard T-shirt now for 2012. If you don't have your Shift Happens shirt, you're out of it. I don't care which side you're on. There's a wonderful book I can recommend to you that puts a lot of this fin de siècle thought into context. That is to say, what happens at the end of a century or the end of a cycle. It's a wonderful book I can recommend to you by the historian Hillel Schwartz, and the title is Century's End. And Professor Schwartz wrote this book back in the 80s in anticipation of Y2K. You may remember that was some apocalyptic vision there. Nothing compared to Y12, but I think that's because since then we've had 911. Sort of talking numerological acronyms here. But he singles out 6. He tells the whole story of what happened in 1199 and 1299 and 1399. It's really a great history. He's a historian. And he boils everything down to 6 points, 6 conclusions about happenings at the end of the cycles. And so I'm just summarizing them for you here. He says that there is always a feeling of joy in the face of looming disaster. Sounds paradoxical. There's a looming disaster that's going to happen in the year 1200, but yet people are joyful. In those days, they would have thought it would be the second coming. A second conclusion about these endings of cycles that Schwartz makes is that the moment for change is upon us. And we just happen to be here. I mean, this cycle of 5,137 years is over, and we just happen to be here, right on the doorstep, about to watch it happen. It will open the doorway to renewal, he says. There will be a polar shift from decay to rejuvenation. And that's really interesting. It goes from one extreme to the other, just as these predictions about apocalypse versus sudden harmony unfold. He also notes that in all of the predictions, there are strange stirrings of delight. That this is going to happen. It's titillating, it's exciting. That's probably why we're all here. You know, this is exciting, it's titillating. I got to get back to my work in the lab, but this is exciting. And that, most interestingly, that the knowledge is secretly encoded astronomically. And that's really what turned me on to this. This is always astronomically encoded. I added the seventh item. That's my contribution, that the knowledge that we seek about what's going to happen and how we might survive it comes from far away, comes from afar, both in space and time. And when you think back to the 20s, when King Tut's tomb was dug up, you had all of the Egyptian wisdom, all of the wisdom coming out of the East and out of Egypt. And I think that we have the Maya wisdom today, largely because of what happened in the 1970s when there were great breakthroughs in Maya decipherment. The Maya were very much avant-garde, doing all of these marvelous calculations and writing their hieroglyphs, and it was in the news, and they created the La Ruta Maya, and tourists and people went there and they beheld the ruins for the first time. And so this is terribly exciting. But the interesting thing with the Maya and the Egyptians, you can't get more remote from Western culture than you can with those two groups. Next. And of course, there are the aliens. I can't leave them out. They're from the farthest away of all. But I wanted to show you that alien theories about superior knowledge are not new. They're as old as the hills. And this is a picture from 1850 showing the great so-called Great Moon Hoax, during which an amateur astronomer suggested that he had seen people on the moon through his 1-inch telescope, and this is what they looked like. I'm less interested in the truth of his statement than I am in the way he portrays inhabitants of the moon. They are people in that early Dickensian age, this age of industrialism and all these horrible things happening in society, and crime and disease. Here was a world where people lived in harmony. Avian creatures, as you might expect, women nursing their children, alongside of another peaceful race of rather Pooh Bearish looking individuals who have little residences or huts that are strikingly similar to those inhabited by the noble savage of the 19th century. And so this is some wonderful projection, if you will, of human ideas onto the surface of the moon. And there's some other illustrations like that back in the pre-UFO days. Next. Well, speaking of UFO days, there's a wonderful catalog of aliens. It's too bad that you're not close enough to see them. The picture's too small. But one of my colleagues has traced the evolution of aliens, believe it or not, in how they're pictured. Going from these horrendous-looking beasts of my youth back in the 50s who were strictly here for lunch, namely to have us for lunch, to the more benign ones like E.T., little cute little rubber finger, who would, of course, be your friend for life. But it's interesting if you follow the cycle, beginning, I think, with that awful Jack Nicholson movie, Mars Attacks, you're right back to the luncheon theme. I mean, it's going all the way around the full cycle. I think very much parallel to what happens in contemporary social history. You know, our fears subside. We had the Cold War and so on. My late colleague, the great Stephen Jay Gould, was fond of saying that the likelihood of finding any aliens that look anything like this is 1 in 1 with 26 zeros after it. He says, in fact, you wouldn't even, if you follow the evolutionary bush, you would not even stand a chance of finding an alien being with a face, much less a backbone. So maybe there's some green mold on these walls trying to communicate with us. Yeah, I don't know. I can't say. But it's interesting when you start to look at the biological facts. Next. I have to conclude with a statement from my good friend, Frank Drake, who was the director of SETI. And this will make my point very well about human projection into other cultures, which is, I think, what we're really indulging in here with this 2012 stuff. Frank was a professor at Cornell, who directed Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It had been funded by the government. Now it's privately funded. And as you may have heard, they listen at radio frequencies, because that's the only way you're going to get any messages coming through, for signals that come from aliens. And he was asked by a reporter, interviewed by a reporter, and asked, well, what would you expect? What would you anticipate would happen in the event of a contact? What might happen in the event of a contact? Big question. And I want to show you in conclusion what his answer was. It's about acquiring knowledge from afar, what kind of knowledge it is. Drake says, I fully expect an alien civilization to bequeath us vast, useful libraries of information to do with as we wish. This Encyclopedia Galactica, there's that word again, will create the potential for improvements in our lives that we cannot predict. Another even more stirring renaissance will be fueled by the wealth of alien scientific, technical, and sociological information that awaits us. We may discover the secret of immortality. Well, you could say that's a bit of wishful thinking and projection, but who knows, he may be right. And I may be wrong about what will happen exactly 1,073 days from tonight. But what have I got to lose? I thank you for coming. I'll now remove my tongue from my cheek, and if you want to ask any questions, we can do so. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a question on why 13 Baktun is the end of the cycle, since all of the other numbers in the long count go up to 20, except for the tunes that, in order to make it closer to a regular solar year, cuts it to 18.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are many important Maya numbers. 18 is one of them, so is 13, so is 20. And I don't have an answer for that. I don't think anybody knows. I've never heard anybody proper an answer to it, except to say that it was a significant number. It was the number of layers of heaven in the Maya universe, although that can't be cleanly documented to pre-Columbian times. But the way they made these cycles it was to blend together numbers that they believed to be of significance. 9 is another, being the number of layers in the underworld. And for whatever reason they chose it. I don't have a better answer than that. The same goes with the 260. I mean, people argue about 260 ad infinitum. 13 times 20, which came first. I've talked about 260 being significant as a period, a celestial period. So there is this varied kind of choice of numbers, and I think, to be honest, nobody really knows why they decided on that.
That number 130000 does appear. You showed a stela in which it actually appears, and
it does appear.
Is there a context that indicates that that's the end of the cycle?
Well, no. I mean, there is in the Tortuguero Monument 6, the only one that talks about the next 130000, but the text is very unclear. It's erased, it's eroded. It's not surprising that what's been deciphered suggests something about the deity coming down. A deity comes down. We see this in many of the codices, in the Borgia Codex, for example, from central Mexico. You see the god descending on a silken rope. So the idea